All right, and welcome everyone to the second episode of Shooting the Crit. I, of course, am Bill Bugg, World Crafter with Astral Table, and with me is.
I'm Brandon Meeks. I am another member of the Forever DMs and an actor and performer in the other world.
My name is Derek Konyshak. I'm a eighth grade social studies teacher. I'm also the D&D club head at my school, and I have a side business where I 3D print pop culture items and board game accessories called Board Game Boss.
And I am Jacob Ebelhar, engineer, dancer, all around nerd, and Forever DM's techie.
So we're going to be here today discussing some questions that have been sent in to us beforehand. But just because we got a list of questions doesn't don't feel like you can't ask us in chat anything you want to ask. But what we're discussing today is the common challenges DMs and players have to deal with at table, and how we as DMs and players tend to handle it, and little tricks and tools that we do. And we're going to start off, since each of us has a copy of the list, we're going to roll our little 20-sided die, and person that gets the highest gets to choose the first question.
I was
All right.
totally prepared and had my die with me already.
I got a 15.
I also got a 15.
Well, I got a 5.
Ooh,
Well, you look like your dex is better than mine. You go first.
Oh, it's
nat 20.
Look at that. Starting off big.
So I get to choose the first question,
Nice.
everyone. So I would like to know, how do you handle adjust to when you completely forget or lose a moment in time while you're playing D&D?
Ooh, who wants to jump in here first?
I'll do it. I don't know if it's kind of a cop out, but this is like one of the biggest fears that I have as a DM. So I over plan. Like, I over plan a lot. And I do it in the aspect that, oh, okay, well, if I over plan this and it doesn't get used, I can just use it in later on down the road. But one thing that I tend to do a lot is random tables. And I'm talking not just like random encounter tables to fill the void. I'll have like great resources online. Say the party's in the city, you're really blanking, you got to buy yourself some time, figure something out. I'll roll a off screen. I'll roll a random encounter in the city, and then start role playing it out. Players don't know. Player thinks, hey, is this planned? Is this what's going on? And it buys you enough time as they're trying to role play it and figure it out where you're going to go next. That's one of the tricks that I tend to do.
Interesting. So I actually took this an opposite route. The longer I DM'd, as opposed, so I was a massive planner. I would spend hours every week prepping for that week session. And invariably, I would still get stuck where I hadn't planned enough. And it like eventually hit that tipping point of, all right, how do I better adjust to these situations? And it actually, for me, and this is for me because everybody's going to be different on this, but for me, planning less made me feel like I could be more flexible. So I operated off bullet points instead of having everything to the nth degree. Now, that only goes so far as you're able to improv. And your results may vary in terms of your skill at being able to pull stuff out of your ass. But for me, one of the things that in terms of like a true brain fart moment, and this can go for a lot of different things, either I view it as one of two ways. If you know that you're dealing with something that's pivotal, that you really need to work towards, and you're completely blanking on how you needed to do it, it is okay to ask your table to give you a minute. Like, take 5, let me recollect myself. I know this needs to go a certain way. 1 second. it is okay to have that communication with your players and your table to ultimately get yourself back on track. Like, everybody does it. It's fine. The other side of it is go straight improv and let it go where it takes itself. Don't get so hung up on what you had planned. Take that yes and run with it. And sometimes you will be amazed at what comes out of it whenever you start playing off of each other. And it may take a city or a setting a completely different direction than you had planned, but improving through that moment sometimes makes for a really interesting organic growth.
One of the strategies that I've used in the past, which is kind of a combination of what Jacob was saying, is I'll kind of in those moments, if I lose my place or I forget exactly what I need to be doing, I'll shift the focus to the players, and I'll say something like, "Okay, give me 1 second to figure this out. Role play. How is your character feeling right now? Give us some insight into like your decision making process right now." And it does depend on what's happening in the moment. If it's in combat versus like a social interaction, but a lot of times that can fill enough time, the time that you need to kind of collect yourself
We
and
actually
figure
did
out.
that in our first episode of Thrain. When Gabe started having mic issues, right as we were going into combat, you jumped in and was like, "What's Selu feeling right now?"
Guilty.
Like, yeah, it was 100%. Like, it was perfect, and it filled that space, and it, we ultimately wound up having to deal with the issue otherwise. But like, it was a great way to start like the chatter around the table and take away from the blip, so to speak, and keep things moving and feeling organic.
Yeah, I love that exercise because it's valuable to everyone. Everyone is getting insight into that character, and it's also forcing that player to put themselves back into their character's mind and say, okay, like, how would my character react to this? Like, what, like, do I feel strongly about the situation? I think that's a really fun and valuable exercise.
I like that a lot.
So I am hearing a lot about the space where you forget while you're playing, and then there's an interesting way to like think about this question and ask this question of how do you handle when you completely forget a literal moment in time? How do you all handle when you have totally forgot that something happened, or that that you're on a totally different day than what you thought? Like your calculation of time is off. Like, how do you all handle that sort of thing?
So I have a solution for that. This isn't something that I've run into a lot, but in the past we've done games where we the characters have an established history, but we haven't explored that history, and so something will happen, and I've been like, okay, well, let's do a flashback real quick and explain why your character has that knowledge, or why your character has a relationship in this situation with whatever's happening. And so we do like little, and it doesn't take long. It can be, minute and a half of description. Oh, well, there was this one time where we were in this situation, and this is how it played out, and so we were able to overcome it. This is similar. Like,
Actually, just to add to that, there's one of the first times I ever played with Jacob. There's this really fun game called Honey Heist. And Honey Heist has a built-in dynamic inside the game where flashbacks are important.
Yep.
Like, and I remember us having to work flashbacks in as a character and the dynamic of how that went. I love that.
was a
And
lot of fun.
working that into a D&D game would be incredibly fun.
Oh, and I know I've played in RPGs where like that is part of the mechanic. They have that written in there as well.
I've heard of DMs taking those flashback moments and allowing players to essentially like give themselves inspiration.
Yeah, or advantage.
If they can relate what's going on into those flashback moments.
Mm-hmm.
But like on the whole of like remembering those points in time, like you can absolutely put things back on your players. Players go to bring up something that you straight up don't remember.
Give me a flashback scene.
And you can say, what are you bringing that up about? Like, what do you remember about that? Like deflect and have them explain it to you, and what they come up with. You know, and sometimes they may have a legit reason for it. Other times they might just be trying to remember some random thing. And it's also okay to go, oh yeah, no, that was just some random NPC. Like, Lily the barmaid super did not matter, I promise.
But
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would be a really interesting thing, just to kind of sidle into another little tangent. That idea of flashbacks would be, I'm just thinking that'd be a really interesting way too of utilizing a moment where the players are just stumped. They do not know what's going on, where they are. They've exhausted. They've not gotten any of the DC successes that they need for a certain thing. It's actually kind of a fun, interesting way to have them earn the possibility of an inspiration, just like a film, using that like cinematic flashback of, oh, it's the
It's like that one time.
moment of realization.
Even taking that and flipping it the other direction, right? Like, not just as the DM forgets things, but what if the DM has planned that the players need to remember this one specific thing of information,
Yeah.
and everybody at the table blanks on it, like
Yeah.
at a pivotal moment, right? Like, tell me that hasn't happened to everybody at some point.
Yeah. Well, and then you
Right?
get, so for example, like in Fellowship of the Ring, it's a riddle moment.
Mhm.
You know, I feel like that could actually be retconned as an idea of that was the DM like giving them this kind of scene to think about. Oh, it's a riddle.
when it comes down to forgetting like moments or forgetting days or forgetting things like that, as speaking for people that are watching this that may be like brand new DMs, there is nothing wrong with looking at your party and going, I messed up.
Mhm.
Especially it's like don't get worried if like right outside the gate you can't cover up something or learn about this or anything like that. You're telling a story, and you as a DM, you got a lot of information behind that screen, and it's okay to lose track of some things. I mean,
I know we were gonna roll on like next questions, but this actually segues perfectly into another question that we have here. So let's jump on that here real quick.
Okay.
When and how do you justify retcons when you accidentally created plot holes and players focus on them?
That's a tough one because
Right?
This is a very hard question for me to answer because one of my favorite parts of DMing is getting all of the pieces to fit, and I'm very like meticulous when it comes to making sure that there aren't plot holes. Now that's not to say that it doesn't ever happen, but I'm having trouble answering this question because of that.
there are never plot holes. There's opportunities.
That's a good way to look at it.
That's the way I always see it. Is well, that dude's dead. We know we killed him and we burned his body. Okay, well, Bill in the back of his head. How can this guy be alive? Oh, he's actually a wizard and he has a clone spell. He has a twin. He was a doppelganger. Just there's no plot hole that can't be described away and added to an opportunity to make the even story more enriched and deeper is how I approach a plot hole. And typically if a plot hole is pointed out or if I notice it during play, I'll just like make a note of it in my book. It's like resolve this before the next game somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Brandon, in our Storm King's Thunder campaign that we ran through, there was several different times that I had to go back and like I realized that the way something had been done, I should have explained differently. And in between sessions, whenever I was like prepping for the next one, I would message the group and be like, guys, okay, this is an important bit of information that I flubbed up. And it comes back to like that. That bit of communication, whether at table or away from table, like it's okay. We're not perfect. The DM is not perfect. The players are not perfect. Nobody at that table is faultless. And if you really want something to go a direction, it is okay to say, I need to retcon this. And yeah, like I absolutely agree with Bill. There are times, and there's, God, I can't tell you the number of times that I didn't tell you all things that were not how I had originally planned it, and we just rolled with it. And it goes back to that improv moment of what do you do with it differently? If it's not salvageable, if you really just are not coming up with something that works or that doesn't feel forced or natural to the story, like, it's okay to just talk about it and say, this is what was wrong. I need y'all to understand this is how this was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think it's good to make it kind of like a council decision kind of thing. Now, and it depends on how extreme the situation is, but like this happens in combat. I feel like fairly often where a player will do something or a DM will do something, and then like 2 turns later they're like, oh, guys, I messed up. I shouldn't have been able to like take this action, or oh, hey, I meant to take this action and I didn't do that. And so a lot of times when that happens at the table, I'll open it up and be like, all right, well, like, what seems fair to you in this situation? We need to, like, this is what we need to fix. What do you think is fair? And we'll just kind of have like a short discussion about it. I try to limit it to like, I don't know, less than probably like 60 seconds or something. I don't want it to bog the rest of the session down, but I think it's okay to have like a little council meeting with your party, to make that decision.
There's a really magical quality about D&D or tabletop role playing in general that is, it's like the storyteller, the DM, the GM is, there's this illusion that this person is the keeper of the never-ending story, the storybook where all the stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really fascinating about that dynamic between the DM and the group is this idea that you can do those things. Like, I messed up. I misread this part of the book. Like this is what's going on instead. And your group often is so into that, like this idea of, there's almost this metagame aspect of it, of, what are the secrets of the game that we missed? Or like, what are the little nooks and crannies in this thing that we're all just making up,
Right.
or we're utilizing someone else totally making something up. And to lean into that, I think, when appropriate and when it gives meaning is a great way to approach the gameplay and to approach things like these holes. It's just kind of a little secret that we all missed,
Mm-hmm.
and look, we found it. I think that's a good way to look at it that I didn't really think about before today.
It's kind of like a pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the little oopsies can be like the funniest things. I mean, I love the quote, comic book series back in the day called Knights of the Dinner Table. And they had an amazing scene where one of the players wanted the DM, and he goes, okay, so you guys are coming to a right turn in a river. And the guy's like, what do you mean a right turn? This is the fourth right turn. Who's heard of a square river? And he goes, oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the dungeon map, not the river map. And they're like, so you've been rowing this canoe down a dungeon for the last 3 hours. And it's just, that's hilarious, guys. I mean, it's like, you think about it, it's like everybody can think about that in game. And that's, honestly, that's D&D, take the good with the bad. I mean, take the mistakes with the triumphs and just roll with it. It's like Derek was saying, things happen in combat. I'll just look at the person and be like, okay, well, your character just had a little extra oomph that round, and just be careful going forward. It's like, just roll, just run with it. In my game Sunday, the paladin I play, I forgot some dice for a smite for like an entire round, like a bunch of damage I could have done. I told the DM, I was like, yeah, I forgot this. I'm like, we don't have to go back and roll it. I'm just letting you know I forgot it.
I think it's got a lot to do with respecting the DM as another player at the table,
Mm-hmm.
and one with an immense amount of responsibility that can bleed over way more into prep time and real life and commitment to the game. And so, if someone has the quality of planning for everything and having contingencies for all kinds of stuff and they never miss, that takes quite a lot of prep or a lot of experience or both,
Yep.
And if a DM wants to run a game like that, great. Like, I'm sure the players are transfixed, by that kind of quality. But that's the DM's choice as to how much time they have to prep and how much they want to devote to it. Now, the other spectrum could be, we wouldn't play if we didn't have Bill DMing, like that could be the dynamic. But Bill's super busy. Bill, he can put together kind of an improv game every week. It's got a lot to do with the love of the game, I think, and like what lengths you want to go to have that experience together and to respect the time of everybody, which includes the DM.
That's a good thought. I like that.
Yeah, I agree there.
Bill, you want to take this next question?
Sure. Let's see. What we got left? How do you manage writing burnout while DMing?
Ooh. For me, it is playing more D&D. If I am only DMing, I get way more burned out than if I get a chance to be a player at a different table. Obviously, your time is your own as far as what you have available to dedicate towards things. I completely get that. But even just an occasional game of not being the person responsible for the prep and the work and everything there and getting to have that moment where you just get to show up and play. For me, drastically helps DM burnout. I was hitting burnout really bad in what wound up becoming a 2-year campaign, and wound up finding another group to play in. How I wound up started playing with Gabe, that led me into meeting all the rest of you all. And that game was so important to me, of just having an opportunity to go and just play. It was a different system. It was a different game feel entirely. It was nothing like what I was running, and it was everything that I needed.
How I handle burnout is I fall back on what I call the pillars of fantasy, and it's basically I'll I'll pick a core book, reread it. I'll thumb through the monsters manual. What's a monster I haven't used in a while? I'll look at some of the third-party monsters manuals out there. I'll find a new comic book. I'll find a new audiobook. I'll watch a fantasy movie I haven't seen yet, or one that I haven't seen in a long time. And it's like I kind of rest on those, just using those to refill the tank, as it were. And yeah, playing. Yeah, there was a while there I didn't get to play. Like I did. Yeah, it's like that was it. Playing's great. It's something different other than DMing, but yeah, if I'm starting to feel a lot of burnout, I'm going back to the things that inspire me.
So I have a couple of different things to say about this. First of all, I'm very fortunate in that the main group that I play with, we have 3 DMs in our group, and we rotate campaigns. So I understand that is not a situation that a lot of people are able to be in, but I love that I am in that situation. That's one of the things that helps me with burnout. But I can't say enough how much I appreciate having adventures to draw from. And that's not to say that like people who develop their own worlds are like that you shouldn't be doing that. But as a new DM or as a DM that doesn't have a lot of time to generate stuff on their own, I love having some kind of framework to go back to. So we've mentioned a couple different adventures already. I'm currently running Storm King's Thunder for my group. I have changed it drastically from the adventure that was written, but I still have that framework to go back to and to draw from. It's not all coming from me. Somebody else earlier mentioned Curse of Strahd, I think, also another great framework to draw from. And that's why there's so many good adventure paths out there, both like licensed and not, that you can download and draw information from. So that is, whenever I am struggling with burnout, that is what I go to. Is I'll go back to either the arc that I'm running, or I'll go looking through free adventures and just trying to find something that kind of fits the feel that I'm going for at that moment. So that's one of the strategies I use.
And some of that can come down to, what you're good at as a DM.
I was thinking about that earlier.
I am not a good blank slate world builder. I'm not. I have come to the conclusion I am not, and that goes well outside of DMing. When it comes to a complete blank slate of anything, I have a really hard time getting started. But if I have something to draw from, and build off of, man, I can take that and go all day.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Storm King's Thunder is a great example. Brandon played in my campaign of that, which is the 2-year campaign that I was just referencing, and we played the shit out of that campaign. And there was so much that we wound up doing with it that was not in the original campaign at all. And I wound up pulling from lore that was trailed back to 2E, like all sorts of different stuff, like different things that were around that made sense to fit in, but were not in the module, right? And it took things a different direction at different times. And we had side arcs that were completely irrelevant to the module entirely.
Yep.
But having that to come back to, and knowing that there was like the overarching world and plot, that when it came down to it, I could come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
When I was ready to, it helped me a lot in running that game.
I feel it.
The question also involves, it's written, it's really interesting because it's like, how do you handle writer burnout? And I would answer that question a little bit in the reverse of what one would think. I find myself either not having or not making a ton of time to actually write. And when I find myself writing is the most inspired that I usually am as a DM. That and interpersonal interactions in character. But yeah, so when I feel myself getting burnt out or feeling like, oh, they're just going to go do this thing, and these signposts, I start to realize, you know what? I need a good dose of actual planned content that comes from me. That's like my stamp on this. And so when I start to feel that way, that kind of burnout, ironically, I kind of lean into, no, I need to get specific with the world. I need to get specific with my world, even if it's someone else's module, someone else's campaign. And that's when so many ideas come. The ideas of, why does this, I kind of, if I'll randomly generate a big bad or something, go, what is this person's story? How did they get here? What are they even doing? And then I can lean into that, find reasons. I think we're running, I'm running Tomb of Annihilation currently, have been for some time. And basically, I wanted to give them a challenging fight, so I gave them an undead wizard creature to fight. And ultimately, I went, oh, I'm starting to run into a thing of not knowing, this kind of just seems to be there as a fight. And so I leaned into it and I went, all right, what can they find to give more information about this? So I basically gave this character a chest that had all of these trinkets and knickknacks and didn't explain pretty much any of them, but people just kind of understood that these things were like mementos and such. And I wrote the letter inside, and it really got into that just with an item, and it kind of sparked and gave me new lease on that section of the campaign.
All right. Anybody?
I dig it.
Anybody good to move on to the next one here?
Oh yeah, let's
Sure. We want to roll off for that next one.
sure.
Well, I haven't asked a question yet, so I
Oh,
was
that's
just
fair. Yeah,
Oh
okay,
yeah,
sure.
go ahead.
Go for it.
for you guys. All right. So I want to hear. Let's see. How do you work with players that aren't involved or in story elements?
I'd kind of like to take this one. I
Yeah,
really
please.
like this.
I got
This
something to
idea.
add after you're done.
So one of my key things is I've dealt with a big spectrum of players. So funny enough, sometimes you tend to find yourself in a group that all share the same mentality as you, or it kind of gets distilled over time into players with a similar mentality. And I have been fortunate enough, is the way I see it, to have a wide swath of people that although we appreciate a similar spirit of the game, we vary quite differently in what we like in the minutia of the game. And so it's given me a lot of practice and exercise in learning what players like and leaning into that. So when I feel that my players aren't really into the story that I've developed, or the characters, if they're just kind of cursory interacting with things in a cursory way, I start to go, well, how can I keep this person involved? If this person doesn't like the story arc saga of what is happening, but they really like rolling dice, I can zero in on that. And when they say, I want to do this, I can come up with difficulty checks. I can come up with like challenges, just tiny ones that increase that game aspect that sticks out in their mind. So I've had a lot of players that feel like, oh, I like the dice, I like the rolling thing. That's what the game is to me. So I will tend to focus on those things. If some people like role play way better than like the story elements, which I think is just another element, but I'll give just a bunch of like asinine side characters that let them riff with their wisecracking rogue, that just let them get one over and develop those characters. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can engage without focusing so much on the overarching story of the campaign or the game.
Go ahead, Bill.
So, adding to what Brandon said, one of the things that I typically do is if I see someone that's just there, I mean, there's two forms. It's just not interested or just completely lost. And I typically force the spotlight on that person. I said it in our last shooting a crit, is like the marketplace scene. Is they're looking to talk to a Thieves Guild member. Well, party's looking around. Thieves Guild comes up to that person, whispers in their ear, slides something in their pocket, gives them a location and a time. All of a sudden, that person is the key point. That person has to talk to the party. And then there's also where I've had this conversation a lot, and people, it's not a disinterest, but people making characters that's not interested in being part of a party.
Mm.
And, the term for that is a lone wolf,
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to that, there's no wrong way to play D&D. You play the way you want to, but the idea is if you're playing with more than just you and the DM, you want to make a character that's going to want to be with a group of other characters.
Right.
It's like we all love the leather-bound, edgy rogue, but if they want to do everything on their own, you know, you're just going to have a lot of the party's doing this and the rogue's doing that. That's fine. Your DM can handle it if the party's okay with it. God bless, go forth. But typically, you would have a lot more fun if you make a character that wants to be involved, or if you want to be involved with it. And one thing that, when it comes to situations like that, DMs and players need to be comfortable with stepping away from the table after game and talking to the person. I've done it countless times where I've looked at my party and been like, okay, well, the game's been going, out of game. Game's done. We're folding up. We're cleaning up, getting ready for the next, to end it. Okay, everybody during the week, you let me know. Um, what do you want to see more in the game? Do I not have enough puzzles? Do you guys want another? Have you not seen a dungeon in a while? Are you want the dungeon crawl soon? Are you going to want to spend some time in town? Or you want more urban intrigue? Ask them what they're wanting to see.
Yeah, I agree. Check-ins are very important. I agree.
Yeah.
We've come back to that theme a couple times tonight. Is just making sure that you're comfortable communicating with your group, and that goes for if you're a DM or a player. And I think it's okay if you're a player and your DM is not doing those things. You could ask him to, like, "Hey, I really like I really like puzzles. I like that puzzle you did that one time. Can we do more stuff like that?" Like, no DM is going to be like, "No, go to hell." Like, no.
And if they are, they're a DM that you don't want to be playing with.
Right.
Go find another group.
Not a table for you.
Yeah. Communication away from table. At table is also important, obviously, but like being able to talk to each other away from table is huge for a successful D&D group.
Agreed.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration, that like you can keep playing this game together even when you're not at table, even if it's not the ins and outs of playing the mechanics of D&D, but like this is still your game together. It comes back to that whole collaborative effort of what this is, right? Like this is everybody's game, not just the DMs. So everyone is involved in what's going on, or should be involved. If they're not involved, how do you get them involved? Which I think is kind of what we're talking about here, right? So like as a DM, if you see somebody that, consistently is struggling to involve themselves or, something along those lines, talk to them. And don't call them out like at table, right? Like putting them in the spotlight in a story is very different from calling somebody out at table, right?
Uh-huh.
Like if you're seeing a problem and you want to try and do better, talk to them about it and ask them what would they be more interested in. I think.
And you'd be.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And you would be surprised, honestly. You would be surprised at the number of times you go up to a player and you say, "Okay, you don't look like you're having fun, or you're just not interested. What can I do as a DM to make things better?" And it could be something going on in their personal life, which is fine. But you'd be surprised at how many times you get looked at by your player and they say, "You know what? I'm just about really digging the character I made, man. I just don't understand it, and I'm not getting it." And give them the option of writing that character out and bringing in a new one. It's like, tell them, it's like, if you could restart right now, what would you play? And just give them that option, and you'd be surprised, like the people that would instantly turn around. And they'd be totally interested. It's like we've all made that character we had fun with, that we thought was going to be awesome, and then we're like, this is a dud.
Yeah.
Still love the idea of my Keku Blood Hunter. Most boring character I ever played.
Yeah, the thematics in creation of that character do not always align with how it plays out at table, and that comes down to a lot of the party dynamic and things along those lines. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that we have around all of this that could lead back to session 0, right? Like having those conversations and developing that character with the DM and back and forth. There's so much stuff beforehand that can help address those things so that things are more interesting when you get to it. But it doesn't change the fact that sometimes it just doesn't work and you're not enjoying it. And it is okay to step away from that character.
Alternatively, I think a good way to handle that. It depends on if they're bored with the character mechanically, or if they're bored with the character like because of the background.
Yeah.
Because the background is something that can be fixed, and it's something that can be developed. And if they're just not feeling the character background, you can sit and have like a one-on-one session with that player and just ask them those probing questions that get them to explore the character and like that character more. If it's a mechanical thing, then that's a different story. And then, yeah, I think it's okay to just drop a new character for sure.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Like, before dropping a character, always ask the question of what it is that they're not enjoying, right?
Mhm.
Like, if they just have decided, God, I don't like playing a warlock. I just don't like playing a warlock. Then, like, it almost doesn't matter what you're looking at backstory-wise. If they're not enjoying how a warlock works, they're gonna have more fun playing something else.
If it's not your cup of tea, you don't have to drink it.
Right.
I mean,
Well, I like this. All great like suggestions and things from the DM perspective, and I kind of want to also bring some tips to players that are just like as a player, if you are feeling not into it, or you're feeling like you're not serving the story, or any number of insecurities that you can feel as a player in D&D. I've had a few people dear to me talk about like I'm just having issues like kind of connecting or doing these things. And a little philosophy that I've come up with also as a player for myself is, if we're in a session and I'm playing and all of a sudden I'm feeling kind of bored. Someone else is, kind of doing a lot of their thing. There's some time, and sometimes because of the choices even that I'm making, like, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to wait. That's my choice. I kind of made that, and I set myself up for other people that are going to engage to kind of play. So
Sure.
there are certain times when I actually have to not just be active about suggestions in game, but also how I'm engaging with the game. So if I'm having a day where, man, I'm just not getting a chance to role play that much, well, lean into character motivations, lean into like mechanics, like, ooh, what are like, maybe this is a plot game for me. Maybe this is a role play game for me. Maybe this is a bonding with the other players game for me. How do I approach? There can be so many ways that you can engage with the game that have nothing to do with the story you are telling together. So many different things.
So taking a slightly different view at what you're talking about someone who's not satisfied with their character.
Yeah.
But let's talk about a player who notices somebody else is not satisfied with their character, or somebody else who is exhibiting these like behaviors, not being involved in the story. It's not all up to the DM. You can step in there to a point and get them involved with the story. And it's something that I do occasionally, is when I can tell somebody has lost interest, I will engage with their character directly. I'll sit there and be like, okay, how can I pull this person into the scene with my character?
Yeah.
And I'll go up to them directly and try to get them involved. Another thing I have a habit of doing is when people say like they get into the mechanics of the game and they're like, okay, yeah, so I hit him twice and I did this amount of damage. Something that I am guilty of. I'm always like, all right, well, what's it look like? And sometimes I worry that I'm stepping on toes, because like that's it should be the DM's job, but the DM has other focuses. He's a lot on his plate, and so I don't feel too bad about doing that sometimes. Because sometimes you get really cool spell descriptions or attack descriptions from stuff like that, and it clicks. It has that you'll see the click in that person's head. They're like, okay, yeah, I just did this damage. You're like, what's it look like? And they're like, oh yeah, right. I'm supposed to describe this stuff, and this looks really cool. Actually, this is what I did, and that's a way to kind of like snap them into the feel of it,
And something that I've seen from some players is like, you'll ask them that, and they may like completely blank. Like, they've never been asked to do that before, right? Like, oh God, I don't know. And the DM describing those moments is something that often happens, but as they see those things happen and as they do it, that I feel a lot of players will start to learn how to take that and learn to describe what they're doing with it. And the more you ask them to involve themselves in those descriptions, the more you get that collaboration, because it's absolutely not just the DM's job. The DM winds up doing it because that's what paints the picture. But if your players are doing it as well, I love those moments of interaction where somebody takes something a different direction than what's in the DM's head, and they paint the picture. I love that.
Something that I like what you're saying, Derek. It's funny because I find myself doing that with most of the characters that I create. Usually have some sort. The characters I create are usually almost always on the road to or already kind of intertwined with the group. Even in eccentric ways. I've played probably one of the most eccentric characters I've ever played, and yet still I gave these outlets with that person to always be able to comment on something someone else was doing, even if it was very dry, like in character or something. I love to involve other people, and being, like you said, this second set of eyes for the DM that has a lot of other things going on, and any work that you can kind of help lighten the load of the DM, I would say. I think most DMs are thankful if the players are engaging with the other players and everyone seems to be enjoying it. Most DMs I've ever encountered are going to go, all right, like,
Yeah.
it's just
Honestly, as a player, you want to make your DM's day. Simplest thing: start keeping track of your own concentration. Honest to God. I mean, I do it as a player. If I have a concentration spell up or anything like that, I take damage. I'm rolling. And I mean, it's easy to calculate what you have to roll. And you know how many times I look at the DM and go, oh, by the way, I failed my concentration. They go, oh, I forgot completely about it. I'm like, well, you've got enough to worry about. It's my concentration. I'll keep track of it, you know?
Right.
And it takes a lot off their shoulders. They don't have to worry about a thing if you're doing it yourself.
And to help with that, if you're playing in person, you can purchase condition rings that are 3D printed at boardgameboss.com. Hey.
You can find the link down in the about section below, folks.
Shameless
I didn't
plug.
realize we're mirrors.
What was that Wayne's World reference we were saying?
Yeah.
Contractor, no, we will not bow to any sponsor.
I know we have taken that one a few different directions there, so I think it's maybe about time to move on to another question here. And I believe everybody's asked one, so how about we roll off for the next one?
You have not.
Have I not?
You have not.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did number
I did
6.
too. Yeah. I retcons. I picked it and ran with it in that direction. It was a good segue moment. So
you did such a beautiful segue, you didn't even notice, Bill.
See, I had you so involved in the moment, you didn't even know.
I rolled a number 1.
I have the nat 20 this time.
Your nat 20 edges out my 19.
Oof. Okay.
I did 12. I'm middle of the road this time.
Okay, so I like this question a lot. How do you identify and handle a toxic play environment? What steps do you take to ensure one does not develop at your table? We've actually hit on this topic a couple times tonight.
We have a bit.
But
I can say that he's not here. Don't invite Gabriel.
Man.
This is a tough one because there's so many things that are blatant, like so many things that are blatant, like abuse or sexism, racism, all these big things at the table, like obvious stuff that, in some ways that are present in a lot, that are often present in games because people build the games that they want to see. And sometimes these things are coded, and especially the history of fantasy is coded with a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think it is really good that we look and analyze and try and move out of that, or put doorways so that everyone feels welcome to do these things. but it can also be, most of the time, in how I've experienced, toxic play is very subtle. Talking over people, never letting one particular player talk, even though you might not have anything personal against, or not even it. Toxic play can sometimes just be dynamics that develop that aren't questioned or checked or analyzed. And I've just noticed so many things that can be just so it's just trying to drop out a little bit every once in a while and be aware. Is everyone getting equal time? Are they getting what they want? Check-ins with players are helpful, but sometimes even that's hard to gauge as to when the conversation should happen. So I recommend, just when you think about it, try and identify. And I'm going to open it up to everybody else because there's so many things to talk about.
I mean, identify the biggest problems. Murder hobos. It's not really a problem. I mean, if it's their style of play, there's a table for them. The over-sexualized bard, people got a problem with that. But what Brandon said, struggling, especially in a online medium now, of players getting talked over. There's countless times, especially in our game Statera, Brandon is playing a very quiet character. Hearth. There's times I feel like Hearth is getting talked over a lot. And I'll make it a point, like, Brandon, is there anything you need to say? Did you have anything you want to say? I'll ask people, especially if I see them go to say something on the screen and someone else is already talking, or someone, accidentally talks over them, I'll make sure to go back to that person and, ask them what if they needed to add. But how I handle toxicity it's a funny story. Just to give a perfect example, is I put in real world consequences for things. So let's use the over sexualized bard as a example. I had a bard in my campaign, or one of my campaigns, many years ago. He was the type, he wanted to seduce everyone. He wanted to seduce the dragon. He wanted to seduce the farmer's daughter. He wanted to seduce everything. It's fine. It's funny. It's a trope. But it was just going way too far. And I could see that it was making someone at the table uncomfortable. So me as a DM, you got to have your own fun too. So they're at a party. He rolls seduction on a noble. Well, he didn't know that this noble, Lady Demescu, had a very jealous streak with her beaux. And after betting her for the first time, when he went to lay down with a tavern wench, next thing you know is he was beat up in an alley by her bodyguards because he's only supposed to be betrothed to Lady Demescu. To the point that he realized he's messed up. He's now in their culture. They're in the culture of this town. Once they slept together, they are betrothed for the course of 7 years before their marriage. So then the party had to get him out of it. And he was very selectful on who he does it to in the future. But if it becomes bad, don't feel like you're overstepping by taking that player to the side and asking, tone it down a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think a lot of these problems can be kind of dealt with before they actually happen. And I want to ask Jacob about something he said earlier. He mentioned session 0, and I know what a session 0 is for me, but I want to ask you to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So I'm going to preface this that I am going to come back to this in a non-session 0 fashion here in a few minutes. But in terms of session 0 itself, so for session 0 can be different things for different tables and what that means for them. For a group that's been playing together for a long time, or that is already familiar with each other in a game, a session 0 may look a session 0 may be a session. Like, it may be RP and actually playing out, getting to know your characters together initially, right? Before you really hit your stride. It's finding your stride, right? But especially for new players and new groups, for me, a what I consider a session 0 is sitting down, talking through talking through your intents for character creation, what type of game it is that you're going to play. Like,
The tone of the game.
What is the tone of the game? How silly do you want it to be? How does everybody feel about possibility of death? Like things of those lines. Like, do you want to be challenged in your encounters to the extent that your character may die? And that answer may vary widely between players. I have seen players that do not, like, they are there to feel like a badass, and they don't actually want to experience that risk of loss in a character, versus others that are like, oh my God, throw it at me, right? Like, if I have 3 more characters in the wings, I will throw down however many you decide to kill, right? Like, the session 0 is the perfect opportunity for everybody at the table to express what it is that they're looking for in the game. And we've touched on this a lot in these questions today of expressing your expectations and getting everybody on the same level of what the game is going to be. And, if the DM comes into session 0 with one thing and all of the players that the DM winds up with are DM comes in, this is Curse of Strahd, we are running horror mystery, like you can get shanked in a back alley, and then eaten by zombies. And all the players come in thinking we're playing My Little Pony, like that is a very different feel of what's going on, and everybody is going to be on a different page if you don't square that away. So that session 0, to me, is that time to do that, and time for everybody to give red flags, right? The opportunities for folks to state what they do and do not want to see in their games.
And that can be a hard conversation to have, but there are resources out there for that. Bill just started up a game with us a few months ago, and he sent out a survey that was like, it had like a whole list of things. What are you comfortable with? And you check, like, anything that you don't want to see in your game, you just check the box. There are a ton of like lists out there you can find, or surveys like that. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Consent is always a conversation that takes way less time than you think it does, and it can help immensely in so many ways. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
No, I was just going to go ahead and add one thing with session 0 is a habit I picked up from another DM. I'll take everything that's normally discussed in a session 0, and especially D&D Beyond. It's great because you have the description of the campaign that anybody can click on anytime, and I'll put the full preface of the adventure in there, and I'll go down to rules, arguments at tables. Like, I'll have it in there. It's like, how do we handle rules, arguments at tables? And I'll have always defer to the GM. If it needs to be covered between games, cover it between games. Or, everything in there from character death, how we homebrew rules that we're going to be using for the game, anything like that. All of it's going to be written in there to where the players can go back at any time and look and see how we're handling this or how we're handling that.
Yeah, the session 0 is the perfect opportunity to bring up that sort of stuff. What is or is not allowed, how you're going to go about things, what mechanics are or are not in play, all sorts of different things.
I also like the question of, like, what kind of game are you looking for? If your players are going in wanting a lot of combat, but you're like a storytelling DM, you might need to pivot a little bit and give them more of what they want, stuff like that.
Sure, absolutely. Coming back to the question from a non-session 0 perspective, I have a prime example from a game that I played in not long ago of where toxicity can develop, regardless of everything having been done right from expectations at the beginning, people that have played together for a long time, all of that, and it can still happen. And sometimes you don't realize it's happening until, like, you've gotten pretty far into it. So I had a situation in a campaign where my character and another character played by an incredible friend of mine were just set up to not work together. My character was super logical, super like take things by the reins and like try and herd the cats toward it, and his was essentially a senile old knight that barely knew where he was. And there's way more depth to that than I'm giving it credit on either side. But what began as us playfully butting heads in character, actually over time of the campaign developed into us getting really agitated with each other. Like it spread into player conflict. And it required us to step away and have a lengthy conversation away from table to discuss things with each other. It eventually hit a point we were both walking away from the table just pissed at the other person. And it was like, to this day, we are phenomenal friends. He is one of my absolute best friends, but we were leaving table pissed at how things were going down between the other, and neither one of us understood each other's character. That it really came down to some failed dynamics that just did not work. And it caused a toxic play scenario for us, and it spilled out to other people. Like, us getting frustrated with each other spilled into other people at the table seeing it, and that caused hesitation and problems. Like, it was not good. It was super not good. But we have talked about it multiple times here. Like, communication is everything whenever you are playing a collaborative game with people, because you are not here to play it by yourself. You are here to play it with everybody at the table. Your viewpoint is not the most important viewpoint. Your viewpoint is one of many. So learning how to communicate when there are those conflicts that are not working out, I cannot express how important it is to be able to talk to not just your DM, because this was not an issue with the DM at all. This was purely just us as players having an issue. Is be able to have those conversations, and don't do it at table. Take the time whenever you can sit down and talk about it to really work through whatever it is that's going on, and figure out what you need to do so that everybody there can enjoy what is happening. And if it means you need to pivot how a player is working, you pivot how a character is working. You know, like, those moments of working through those conflicts ultimately led to us both enjoying the game way more. It just, as Zarek said in chat here, like, communication is just paramount to everything that is involved in D&D.
Yeah, because it can cycle back, and it creates patterns, and it creates cycles. And if you don't break the chain, you can't you can't get to a place. And as you said, it can happen between people who are the opposite of uncomfortable with one another. It can happen with people who are the most comfortable. It can happen between, great friends. It can happen between partners in game. There's just so many things, and I think it's key and important to, as I said before, like, step back and kind of look at, kind of turning on your meter of your fun meter, and like kind of hovering it over your fellow players and kind of going, does it seem like this person's having fun with X, with Y, with Z, or does it seem like they're having problems? And as a DM, I think it's important to be able to start to recognize some of those dynamics as they happen, do what you can, which may be very limited, to help mitigate or to help facilitate a conversation, or just be be there if someone is needed to mediate and be part of it, or to ultimately make hard decisions if you've gotten to the depth and level where like it's spilling over everywhere. It's really tough. None of those decisions can be made for you as a DM or as a player, and being aware of them so that you can enjoy your life and enjoy your gaming life. It's very important.
All right.
Okay, let's see. We got two more. You just want to go ahead and ask one?
Well, I feel like I just talked a crap ton around a lot of different things on that. So how about I ask this one and you all do the answering?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's see. What are your justifications for keeping up with or limiting content, especially with the speed of content release and amount of homebrew constantly flooding the game?
I'll take this one if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
When it comes to content, especially with homebrew, I don't allow homebrew of people I don't know unless it's something that we discussed beforehand. If someone brought it for me, it's like, hey, I like this homebrew, this character class, this whatever, take a look. And even then, I try to look for the closest third thing in the rules that kind of meets that. My whole thing, my worry about homebrew is it could be, you could think it's the most balanced thing in the world, and it could be way overpowered, or it could break the game. But as speed of content comes out, I typically talk to my players about it, and I tell them, it's like, hey, I'll use Tasha's as an example. Tasha's just came out. If there's anything you want to use, come to me first. We'll talk about it. I'll read up on it, and we'll decide together. Just be respectful of the stuff coming in. But content such as new content and homebrew and everything like that, just when it's an established game that's been going for a while, I don't really see it having a lot of big issue, unless like the characters are advancing in a level.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say on this topic besides like I'm pretty easygoing when it comes to content. I just have a policy, and it's a policy that I established when we started playing of like run it by me, and if I okay it, that doesn't mean that I can't kick it out later if it becomes a problem or if it becomes too powerful or we realize that it's like broken or stronger than we thought. And I also have the same policy if there's something that we think is going to be really cool and it doesn't end up working out, maybe we increase the effect of it, or maybe we rework it to see, stuff like that. Other than that, yeah, I agree with everything you said, Bill.
I also tend to welcome, if I think something's going to be a little overpowered or kind of odd, I tend to just allow it. And sometimes, the player notices and they're just kind of like, yeah, this isn't that well defined. There's some aspects of this that seem unbalanced, and can. One of the major times it happened for me was one of my players was they had used a class that shall remain nameless, but it kind of became a everywhere, all over the place class. And funny enough, even though it afforded a lot of flexibility and power, like this player of mine was feeling like, I just kind of want more focus. I want a character that's got more oomph, and so it naturally progressed into into an evolution amongst the two of us that didn't even require administration on my part. So I think sometimes people can make a bigger deal of these things than they warrant. However, other DMs run maybe tighter ships than I do, or they have very specific goals with a campaign or very specific things they're shooting for. And in that case, I say, if you know the system well enough, if you know what's going to cause problems, then yeah, administer what you want. Give yourself that flexibility, and you may not need it.
I think this also is something that ties back into what we already talked about with session 0, right? Like establishing what it is that is or is not going to be involved in your campaign at that point, so that everybody is on board with it and you can have that discussion and discourse. If a player really has their heart set on creating this character that is this homebrew thing, then you can talk about that. Is it an option? Is it on the table? Is it not? But as both a DM and a player, I think anytime homebrew becomes involved is just make sure on both sides of that dynamic you leave yourself open to adjustment, because sometimes it's really hard to tell if something works or doesn't. And something being strong and overpowered may be specific to the setting, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're playing a super low magic setting, but you have this idea of this character that involves a mechanic that always gives them a magical weapon, right? Like that could be game breaking to how things work, right? And that's on the DM to have that conversation with the person, that, maybe this operates differently in this situation, or, you make those adjustments so that it fits what's happening. Or offer a different option for the player and see what works. Try and come to a resolution around that. But anytime you're making changes to the base system, whether it's involvement of a single homebrew item or anything along those lines, like make sure everybody at table accepts the repercussion of this is contingent to change if it needs to.
Coming off that a little bit, I also think it's important to let the other players know what's going on. Because I think it's really easy if a player comes to you and they're like, hey, I want this like really cool thing in this homebrew, and you allow it. I think it's really easy for other players to see that and be like, what the hell is that? Like, I don't have anything cool like that. And if they don't know the mechanics behind it, if they don't know what is going on, it could lead to some resentment. And so I think it's important to make sure everyone knows what you've given people.
You've got to be able to be flexible like that. Perfect example is our game with Stratera and your character, Derek. You love the idea of that Bard Pistolero from the Gunpowder Codex, which is a third-party character concept that gives the gunslinger aspect to all classes. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea too. I thought it was a fantastic idea. And you got to playing it, and you didn't like it. Then you're like, hey, can I just go like to College of Lore? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just switched you. I mean, it's no big deal.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that.
And it's when it comes to changing things, it's a game that everybody's supposed to have fun playing. And I think when it comes to homebrewing stuff, unless you got your heart set on playing like a specific type of character that requires a lot of homebrew, it's like I'm not going to allow a lot of homebrew, because I homebrew a lot of stuff when it comes anyway. Like technically in Stratera, I'm homebrewing a lot because I'm using a third-party book for most of it, and that's that Sandy Peterson's Call of Cthulhu book.
Yeah.
So I want to at least read over everything and say if it's going to fit or not. But going into what you were saying about the setting, and also circling back to something that we talked about earlier this morning on the Forever DMs Discord, which if you're interested in being part of the Forever DMs Discord, shameless plug, you can go to our About section here on our Twitch, and there should be a link for the Forever DMs Discord. But we were talking about with the release announced today of the Ravenloft book. I'm a big fan of second edition Ravenloft, and one of the big sticklers in second edition Ravenloft, magical items were rare. Like, I think Strahd himself had a +1 flame tongue in his vault, like just +1. And I had a character that wanted to come in second edition, and they wanted a family sword that was like a +2 to start off with, and I'm like, we can't do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that bleed into what seems feasible for your campaign and your world. But I think a good DM also makes allowances and incorporates them into the story in a way that both works for the player and works for the setting. So I can think of Hearth for Stratera right now that we're playing on our stream.
Mhm.
And Hearth, I wanted, when I kind of knew we were doing a Victorian kind of style, I thought, I'm probably never going to play a Warforged ever. So this kind of steampunkish, yeah, dark steampunkish setting is kind of perfect for a race that I think is pretty cool, but would probably never play in a high fantasy campaign. And Bill, to his credit, was like, "Oh yeah, I've had Warforged before. Just know that uh, Warforged are the thousands of years old at this point. You're probably likely going to be found or something." So we came up with all that together, but also there was this element of, and provided you're cool with it, like as long as you're cool with it, people are going to look at you very strangely. You're going to be the only one they've ever seen, likely. And now it is an active shtick. It's an active thing. Like people notice it all the time. They basically think Hearth has this
It's a real
very
nice armor you got
elaborate. Exactly. So in character as Hearth, I have come up with several excuses. I think the latest one is that it's a family heirloom.
Yeah.
And that's a really wonderful way of incorporating.
Just can't seem to take it off.
And allow exactly.
And
Exactly. And the same thing with Killian. You do a great job of hiding the fact that you're a magic user in a world where people are very suspicious of magic. So it's the guns. I've got these high tech guns. It's a really cool way of doing those things while still helping the DM keep an integrity and tone that they want from their game.
one thing with running Stratera, which is a world that I've run since high school, it's gone through countless evolutions. Because I love the fact that it has so much of this player-driven history of past campaigns that have become history throughout this world. But one thing I tell people, especially with all this new content that gets released with new editions, if they come up to me with a character that's never been in my world before, like a Warforged or a Furbog, when it comes to Oliver there,
Mm-hmm.
I look at them and I say, this race has never been here, but that's not a no. That's a you help me figure out where this race belongs and where it's been, or where it comes from. And then I'll get the player, if they really want to play that character, they'll help me add this race to my world. And then Gabriel just said something in chat. I'll add this race to my world and it'll become canon, and they helped build my world. And that's one reason I love and I have so much heart towards my world, Stratera, is it's not just mine. It's every person that's ever played in that world has contributed a little, if not a lot, to the construction of it.
Yeah, I really like what we wound up coming up with back and forth
I do too.
with the Furbolgs for
I
all
do
of that.
too.
Everything that has not been discussed in game around the Furbolgs and like what they're doing and how their race like is operating throughout the world is it's such fun little details that we've got in there that we haven't even talked about in the game yet.
I haven't gotten there
really
yet.
at all. But yeah, it's I love stuff like that. Like getting to be involved in those opportunities to build something new, whenever it's something different, it is a lot of fun. Even
Well,
if you're not the DM.
it's like Gabriel and his New World Thrain. He came to me and he said, I'm going to design this kingdom that's all Dragonborn. and I wanted to be very Eastern and Asian culture centric, in its inception and its design. And months later, I'm playing a samurai dragonborn named Jubei that loves to cook. And he's a very fun character because I have this thing as a player right now, since I'm getting to play on the regular. I'm working my way through the classes. It's like I'm particularly finding a class that I have not played yet in 5e, or I've not played in a long time, and a race, and I'm just doing combinations of it. Like I'm playing uh, in an Avernus weekly Saturday Sunday game now. I'm playing a Minotaur Paladin, Abel. He is the holy cow. I love
Mhm.
playing Abel. Um, and I'm playing a Dragonborn fighter, which is very stereotypical for D&D, but I'm making him unique for me.
Yeah, the just touching on Thrain there, I have a several page document that helped get developed around the Terrandine, uh, and the Elven Society around all of that Selu is based on. So like that involvement sort of thing is super fun, especially in homebrew worlds around that. But just to bring this back a little bit and touch on a topic here that was within that question, around limiting content, not just like allowing homebrew, like justifications for limiting content. Um, as a DM, like you have the choice to decide what you do and don't want to operate with. If that involves homebrew, then, you're opening yourself up to that. But at any point in time, you have the right to say, no, I don't think that works in the game, or no, I don't think that's balanced, that sort of thing. But if you're operating from a module, or you're working from a very non-homebrew perspective, it is okay to not include those things. If you don't want to deal with it, because it can be a headache and it can be a concern of, more things to have to juggle and keep track of and not have in D&D Beyond, which maybe you use a ton, or not have available in whatever other platform that you're running your game through, or anything along those lines. Like, that is okay. You are allowed to say, I'm not using that book. Adventure League, which is, the fifth edition cookie cutter way of approaching D&D, where anybody can come in and drop in and out of games. They have very explicit rules on the number of books that can even be applied to
And
a
I
game.
love that.
Right?
I love the one and one
Mm-hmm.
rule. It's like when you make your character, you get the core rule book and you get one other supplement. I'm I love that. I honestly do. For a first time player, that is like great. There's so much content out there. You pick the core book and one other, and you make your character. And I think I actually told you guys at the beginning of Thrain, yeah, we've branched off and done some stuff and like Tasha's and everything like that now that you guys established your characters. But I think I told you at the beginning of making your characters, stick to one and one, you know, and
And that can help, especially new players.
yeah,
That can help them in even deciding what they want to do, right? Like, if you try and approach the entirety of content that is available, welcome to analysis paralysis. Like, if you don't know what you want to do already, good luck. You're going to
and
read for weeks before you ever come to a decision on what you want to do there.
Well, and some of that might just be also just your comfort level. If you're a new DM, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I remember my first 5e campaign. I ran a few 3.5 back before the flood. But recently, about 2-3 years ago, I started running games, and I ran Lost Mine of Fandelver for a few friends of mine so that we could be in touch over long distance and such. And so many of them were brand new players, or if not brand new players. So we were all kind of operating from, I had playing experience and running experience, so I was confident that I could do enough of it. But I didn't have feats for that. for example, because number one, I'd have to explain it to the players, which, the less was more in this case, and less was better. It did bog down things significantly less, and it just also let me feel out this feel out 5e, feel out this edition for balancing encounters, balancing other dynamics in the game, because some feats aren't combat related, but they can, make it so that it's impossible for you not to notice things sometimes once you get to a high enough level. And sometimes the fun is in having to search for things. So I feel like echoing what a lot of people have said, but giving reasons for why, like, do what you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. At every stage of the game, and don't feel like you have to that you have to inordinately apologize for that. Go ahead.
But when it comes down to comfort levels, also with content, as a DM and as a player, don't be afraid to, as a DM, approach a player that, there are some spells out there that can get abused. And number one of those is Mold Earth. And I'll be honest, if a character takes cantrip, or a player takes the cantrip of Mold Earth in my game, I have a talk to them about it, because there are countless videos on YouTube of people talking about using Mold Earth to like glitch their way through dungeons, to make insta kill big bad traps and like all this other stuff. And I'd be like, keep in mind, I want you to have this. I want you to use the cantrip that you want to use, but I'm not going to let you abuse it. Another one before they nerfed it was Healing Spirit, which, if you ever read up on the original Healing Spirit, it was the marching band healing in the party, because as soon as you walk through it, you got healed. You could just put it out, out of combat, and people are just and just running through and getting healed all the way up to their full HP. But
it was even better around that was people that were talking about being able to like use reactions to shove and push people through it off of their turn. So like in a single round of healing, the way it was written, you could actually get like multiple times pushed into and out of the thing. And there was no cap on the number of times that it could heal within the duration of like 1 minute duration of the spell. Like it was, there was so much that could be gamed out of that through just obliterating the mechanics.
And you ever play with those type A personality people that try to win D&D, that's one of their go-to things. But on the player, on another standpoint, I'll use the Avernus game as an example. I wanted to play a paladin go into hell, and the divine sense of being able to sense like a demon and celestials and everything from around. The DM he straight up told me, he's like, that ability annoys the crap out of me. He's like, I hate that ability. And it's not the make or break of my character. My character's not based around one ability, so I limit how many times I use it, because I don't want to annoy the DM with it. Yeah. It's just because I'm a DM. I understand that. I hate the warlock that takes detect magic as a cantrip, and they're sitting there, they think they can have it up as a detect a magical item radar. It's annoying. I understand it. But
there are times where choices of something are like clear winners to the situation, right? But do they make for a fun and entertaining thing to do in the moment, right? It like that comment of like, oh, I'm gonna do this because this wins, right?
Yeah.
But like, is it fun? A prime example, early on in Storm King's Thunder, whenever I was running it, I had a bard in the party that his absolute favorite thing in the world was Hypnotic Pattern. And Hypnotic Pattern is extremely strong against anything that does not have a good wisdom saving throw. And it became a challenge in the moment of like, how the hell do I deal with Hypnotic Pattern? And like I started throwing things into fights that were like ways to work around that. and learning what to do in those scenarios so that like it doesn't become this penultimate thing that's just like, cool, well that thing's gazing off into the distance for the next minute while you teleport yourself 200 feet away and can't have a broken concentration from it. Sweet, that was only the big bad, it's fine. Like the moments like those where like being cognizant of what is fun for others, I think is an important part of that collaborative storytelling.
But
And also being aware that when you have your DM may actually allow those sorts of things, but then they might have an approach that you might not like as to their response. It's like I had one of my earliest DM who I adored their style and how prepared they were for a lot of stuff. But he kind of told us all the time, if you all are going to SEAL Team 6 this, I'm going to SEAL Team 6 back.
Yeah.
These enemies are going to get a lot smarter. They're going to engage you. I'm going to play them at the utmost intelligence and strategy. I know your weaknesses, and I will go after them. So it was just always an ever-present, not really threat the way they put it, but it was a good reminder that do what you want to do to have fun, but know that if I feel the game's getting out of balance, I'll do what I have to do to make sure you all are being challenged.
There's a book series, the first one of which is called "The Monsters Know What They're Doing," and it's basically strategies for a DM to for combat tactics and countering kind of what you're talking about. But it's a really good read if you have never heard of it or given it a read before.
They've got the website too, that with a bunch of different articles.
I've pulled some really fun stuff from that before, actually.
I believe it was a website first, and it was so popular that he ended up publishing a book. Actually,
it's like the SEAL Team 6 response to things there. I'm blanking on the name of it, but there's a certain basically what is intended to be an insanely challenging dungeon run that folks have done and developed that is literally just fighting kobolds, right? And they're not super high stat kobolds or anything along those lines. It's just what happens when kobolds know what they're doing on how to defend their dungeon. And having to deal with that where you're playing against a really smart setup against you versus just the run-of-the-mill monster. It's a totally different ball game.
One of my favorite moments that I've done as a DM was a party that was tracking down a group of kobolds that stole an entire pen full of pigs, and the entire time they're like, "Oh, well, they're just stupid kobolds. They're just stupid kobolds," and they're on the trail of these kobolds, and they find out that they have set up residence in this old quarry where there's these straight tunnels. On top of that, they've stolen a case of the quarry's TNT. So they're going down this tunnel, and the next thing I hear, they start hearing this whee as these pigs are running at them that are burning, that have TNT strapped to them. So now the party has to dodge flaming pigs with TNT on them, and either shoot the pigs or dodge the pigs, and then wherever the pig dies, it's going to blow up the next round in that spot. The party almost got wiped out by a simple encounter with kobolds, dynamite, and pigs. And it's when the monsters even halfway know what they're doing, some parties are not prepared for that.
It also leads to really cool feel in combat when the monsters are working together, or the thematically it makes sense that they get advantage in certain situations. That feels cool as a player, because I'm like, oh man, these guys are messing us up. We need to figure out tactics to counter their tactics. It forces the players to be creative.
In my game of Straterra, the Chulls and the Deep One great white
giant shark, yeah.
Yeah, they were the trash men and the trash compactor. He moved 5 feet around, but they picked people up and took them to him. Like, I remember Oliver kind of freaking out.
Which in
It was a
turn led me
moment.
to,
Yeah.
to, to target him with Eldritch Blast so I could repel him away from the thing so he didn't feed you to the. Like, yeah, I remember that was a really cool moment. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh man. Well, I'm
But
sure we could sit here and regale stories around this, that, or anything else for the rest of the night. However, we are almost 30 minutes over our original time estimate on things. So, any last moment requests here from anybody before we wrap things up?
while we're looking to see if there's anything I want to add, Derek mentioned the what if monsters know what they're doing. Earlier, we were talking about prepping. Prep as much as you want, as little as you want. There is a amazing book series called The Lazy DM, and The Lazy DM talks about that. It actually talks about limiting your prepping. Great book series, well worth the read. Um, but I wanted to get that suggestion in there because when he mentioned the monsters thing, I was like, oh man, I forgot to mention Lazy DM. Um,
No affiliation, by the way, just promoting products that we like.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely talk about stuff that we use.
For sure.
So yeah.
And for reference, if anybody wants to look it up, Tucker's Kobolds was what I was referring to. If you've not ever looked that up, and give it a look.
That sounds like a fun one shot. Is it a one
will.
shot?
So it has been written in various editions of the system throughout things. I don't know if anybody's ever done a 5th edition rendition of it, but it's a murder run. Like,
That sounds like the type of adventure where you tell your players to come with 3 characters and then
Yeah.
you figure out a way to roll all 3 of them
Yeah.
in.
it's like old school Tomb of Annihilation type things. Like, come prepared to die.
Yeah, that sounds great.
It's the D&D Kobayashi Maru.
Pretty much. Pretty much, yeah.
There's an amazing book series that came out in 2nd edition called Grimtooth's Unsurvivable Traps.
I've heard of
And
that before. Yeah.
some of these traps are absolutely hilarious. My absolute favorite one that makes me crack up every time is a rope hanging above a pit of fire. And the trap is when they go to jump across the rope's actually the ceiling is illusion and the rope is attached to a hydrogen balloon. It's just these horrible trap ideas for DMs, and the book is just absolutely hilarious to read through.
That's
It'll
awesome.
really make you rethink your traps.
No doubt. No doubt about
We
that.
we should do an episode on popular resources. Actually, it sounds like we could talk about this for a while.
Oh,
I
man.
think it's a running thing. On our first episode, we talked about a lot of tools and things that we use.
Yeah. That can be a good option.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, I don't have anything else around this. So,
I don't
all right. So,
It's pleasure talking to you guys.
yeah, guys, it was fun. Thanks for
Likewise.
joining us, Brandon and Derek. Appreciate you guys coming on, having some good chats on things.
Glad to be here. Thanks everybody out there. Just keep playing and take care of each other.
keep in mind, next Tuesday at I'm going to get the time wrong. 8 p.m. Eastern.
7 p.m. Eastern time.
At 7 p.m. Eastern time, we will have Thrain here on this channel. The following Sunday in the morning,
Saturday.
Bill. Saturday. Bill's just horrible right now. It's been a long so, Saturday.
You're DMing that one. We need you to show up on Saturday, please.
Yeah, I'll be there. Saturday mornings for Breakfast and Dragons. Check our schedule here, and they'll be on there.
And as a note, check the schedule in the About section, not the schedule on the actual Twitch tab there. Our About section is much more comprehensive on what we actually have going on. So, thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate you tagging along and being with us in chat. And we will see you all next time.